Hey guys. Tonight we're stepping into the marble corridors of the Great Palace of Constantinople, where purple silk tapestries catch the flickering light of oil lamps and the distant sound of Byzantine chants echoes through chambers that have witnessed 1,000 years of imperial ceremonies. You can almost smell the incense mingling with the salt air from the Bosphorus. Feel the cool stone beneath your sandaled feet as you take your position along corridors that stretch endlessly into shadow. You probably won't survive the sheer monotony of what we're about to experience. 40 years of standing, watching, and waiting in the most boring job in the Byzantine Empire. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are Nikephoros, and it is the year 1025 AD. The morning light filters through the narrow windows of the Bucolian Palace as you adjust the bronze clasps of your uniform for the 10,000th time in your career. Your scarlet cloak, heavy with imperial insignia, settles around your shoulders with the familiar weight of duty that has defined every single day of your adult life. The leather of your boots creaks as you take your first steps down the corridor that you know better than the lines on your own hands. You pause at the mirror, a sheet of polished bronze that reflects your weathered face back at you. At 58 years old, you've spent more time standing in these hallways than most men spend sleeping. Your beard, now streaked with silver, has grown and been trimmed to regulation length, exactly 1,460 times. You've counted. When you have nothing but time and stone walls for company, you count everything. The sound of your footsteps echoes in the pre-dawn silence as you make your way to the armory. Each step falls in the same rhythm it has for decades. Left foot, pause, right foot, pause. The distance from your quarters to your post is exactly 237 steps. You've measured it by pacing it out during the long night watches when sleep refused to come. 237 steps that you will take twice each day, every day, until your body can no longer carry you down these corridors. In the armory, you select your spear from the rack where it has waited since yesterday evening. The weapon is ceremonial, its bronze point dulled from decades of never being used for its intended purpose. The shaft, carved from seasoned oak, bears the slight indentations where your hands have gripped it in the exact same places for so many years that the wood has molded itself to your palms. You run your thumb along the familiar grooves, a morning ritual as automatic as breathing. You strap on your sword, another piece of elaborate decoration that will never leave its sheath. The weight of it pulls at your hip, a constant reminder of a violence that will never come. In 40 years of service, you have never drawn this blade in anger, never felt its edge bite into anything more threatening than the occasional ceremonial cake at imperial celebrations. Yet every morning, you check its edge with the dedication of a warrior preparing for battle. The first bell rings across the palace complex, its bronze voice calling the dawn watch to their positions. You've heard this bell ring 14,600 times, and each time it sends the same small shiver of responsibility down your spine. Today, like every day, you will stand guard over an emperor who faces no threats more dangerous than indigestion from too much honeyed wine. You make your way through the servants' quarters, where kitchen staff are already beginning their preparations for the day's meals. The smell of baking bread follows you down the corridor, a scent so familiar it has become part of the architecture itself. Maria, the head cook, nods to you as she has every morning for the past 15 years. You nod back, your part in a wordless conversation that will repeat itself until one of you dies or retires from service. The stone corridors seem to breathe around you as you walk, expanding and contracting with the temperature changes that mark the passage of hours. In winter, frost forms on the windows by dawn and melts by midday, creating patterns you've memorized like maps of distant countries. In summer, the stone walls sweat with moisture from the humid air off the water, and you've learned to read the weather in the behavior of the palace stones. You reach your assigned post, the intersection of the blue corridor and the golden hallway, where 4 passages meet beneath a dome decorated with mosaics of Christ Pantocrator, his eyes, crafted from thousands of tiny colored stones, seem to watch you with an expression that might be compassion or might be profound boredom. After 4 decades of staring up at this ceiling during the long watches, you're no longer sure there's a difference. The morning position is yours until the sun reaches its zenith. You plant your feet shoulder-width apart, adjust your grip on the spear, and settle into the stance that your body knows better than sitting or lying down. Your spine straightens automatically, your shoulders square themselves, and your eyes begin their slow, methodical scan of the empty hallways. To your left, the blue corridor stretches toward the imperial apartments, its walls lined with portraits of emperors whose names you learned during your first week of service and have never needed to recall since. The faces in the paintings watch you with the same eternal patience you bring to your own vigil. Emperor Constantine VII, who died before you were born, seems to nod approval at your dedication. Romanos II, whose reign lasted all of 4 years, maintains his painted smile as if he finds something amusing in your endless watch. To your right, the golden hallway leads toward the administrative wings, where clerks and secretaries will soon begin their own day of repetitive tasks. You've often wondered if they find their work as mind-numbing as yours, copying the same forms, filing the same reports, updating the same ledgers day after day. At least they get to sit down. Straight ahead, the passage opens onto the Great Hall, where ceremonies and receptions take place with predictable regularity. You've stood guard during hundreds of these events, watching the same rituals performed with the same words, the same gestures, the same inevitable progression from greeting to feast to farewell. The nobility flows through these spaces like water finding its level, always ending up in the same configurations, always following the same social currents. Behind you, a narrow staircase leads to the upper levels, where the imperial family maintains their private chambers. In 40 years you have climbed these stairs exactly 7 times, each occasion marking some minor crisis that required additional security. A visiting dignitary with suspicious associates, a report of plague in the city that might threaten the palace, a particularly vivid nightmare by an empress who demanded extra guards until dawn. Each time the threat proved to be nothing more substantial than shadow and rumor. The first hour passes with the slow rhythm of a palace coming to life. Servants pad past you on soft-soled shoes carrying messages, cleaning supplies, and breakfast trays to their various destinations. They move with the efficient silence of people who have learned not to disturb the guards during their vigil. Some nod to you in recognition, faces that have grown familiar over years of shared morning routines. Others hurry past with eyes downcast, new to palace service, and still intimidated by the solemnity of the Imperial Guard. A scribe appears from the administrative wing, his arms full of scrolls, and his expression harried with the urgency of some bureaucratic crisis. He pauses at the intersection, consulting a wax tablet covered in notes, then disappears down the blue corridor with the determined stride of someone who believes his mission is vital to the survival of the Empire. You've seen this same scene played out thousands of times, with different faces carrying different scrolls, but the underlying drama never changes. The sound of your own breathing becomes a meditation as the morning progresses. In through the nose, hold for 3 heartbeats, out through slightly parted lips, a rhythm that helps mark the passage of time when the corridors fall silent, and there's nothing to count but the rise and fall of your own chest. Your lungs have processed the air of this palace for so many years that you can taste the changes in season, the approach of rain, the smoke from the kitchen fires, all in the subtle flavors that dance across your tongue with each breath. Your eyes continue their patrol left down the blue corridor, where shadows shift as clouds pass over the windows, right down the golden hallway, where dust motes dance in the morning light, straight ahead to the great hall, where servants are beginning to arrange furniture for some afternoon ceremony. Behind you up the stairs, where all remains quiet and secure. The pattern repeats itself every 30 seconds, a visual rhythm as automatic as your heartbeat. A cat appears from somewhere in the maze of palace corridors, padding silently across the stone floor with the confidence of an animal who knows it belongs here. Palace cats are unofficial members of the guard, serving the vital function of keeping the grain stores free of mice and the corridors free of rats. This particular cat, a gray tabby with white paws, has been your intermittent companion for the past 3 years. She often chooses to spend her morning naps in a patch of sunlight that falls across the blue corridor, positioning herself where you can see her while still maintaining your watch. The cat settles into her customary spot and begins the elaborate grooming ritual that will occupy her for the next hour. You find yourself timing your visual sweeps to match her tongue strokes, creating a synchronized rhythm between guard duty and feline maintenance. It's a small thing, but in a life measured out in small things, every bit of variation becomes precious. The palace bells ring the 2nd hour, their bronze voices echoing through the stone corridors with the same notes they've sung for centuries. The sound bounces off the walls, creating harmonics that transform the simple tolling into something more complex, a musical conversation between metal and stone that speaks of time's passage in language older than words. You've learned to hear the subtle differences in these bells, the way the morning ring differs from the noon call, the evening chime, the midnight toll. Each has its own character, its own emotional weight. A messenger arrives from the outer courtyard, his cloak damp with morning dew, and his boots muddy from the unpaved paths that lead to the palace gates. He carries a leather satchel sealed with red wax, official correspondence from some distant province or neighboring state. The messenger nods to you with the weary respect of someone who spends his life traveling between posts where other men stand watch, and you nod back with the understanding of someone who appreciates the freedom of movement even as you envy it. The messenger disappears into the administrative wing, and you return to your watch. The morning light has shifted slightly, changing the pattern of shadows on the walls and revealing details in the mosaics that were hidden just moments before. A small bird, crafted from blue and gold tesserae, seems to flutter in the changing light. A vine of silver leaves appears to sway as the shadows move across it. These optical illusions, created by the interaction of light and ancient craftsmanship, provide endless entertainment during the long hours of standing watch. Your feet have found their position on the stone floor, settling into slight depressions worn by decades of guards who stood this same post before you. The stones remember the weight of their duty, holding the impressions of countless hours of faithful service. You imagine the men who wore these depressions into the marble, guards who served emperors whose names are now forgotten, who stood watch during crises that have faded into the general tapestry of imperial history, who maintained their vigil through the small triumphs and minor disasters that make up the daily life of any palace. A court physician appears in the golden hallway, making his morning rounds to check on the health of various palace residents. His bag of instruments and medicines jingles softly as he walks, a familiar sound that marks his passage through the corridors. He pauses to exchange a few words with a servant, discussing some minor ailment with the professional gravity that doctors bring to even the most trivial complaints. The conversation drifts toward you in fragments, something about a headache, a recommendation for more rest, a tincture to be taken with evening wine. The physician continues on his rounds, and the corridor falls quiet again. This is the rhythm of palace life. Brief moments of activity punctuating long stretches of stillness. You've learned to appreciate both the motion and the calm, understanding that each serves its purpose in the greater pattern of imperial routine. The activity reminds you that you're part of a living institution, while the stillness allows you to perfect the art of watchful waiting that defines your profession. Your stomach begins to signal the approach of the midday meal, a subtle hunger that will grow more insistent as the morning progresses. The palace kitchens operate on schedules as rigid as your guard duty, preparing meals that arrive with the punctuality of clockwork. You know that in exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes, a servant will bring you a bowl of thick barley soup, a chunk of bread, and a cup of watered wine. The same meal you've eaten at this same time every day for the past 40 years. The cat in the blue corridor has finished her grooming and settled into a contented doze, her gray fur rippling slightly with each breath. She's positioned herself so that she can keep one eye on your position while appearing to be completely relaxed, a skill that guards and cats seem to share. You find her presence oddly comforting, a reminder that even in this vast stone palace filled with human ambition and imperial protocol, there's room for creatures who live according to simpler rhythms. A group of young noblemen appears in the great hall, their voices carrying across the open space as they discuss some matter of court politics. Their conversation is animated but conducted in the careful tones of people who know their words might be overheard and reported. They gesture with the elaborate hand movements that mark aristocratic education, their silk robes rustling with each emphatic point. You've watched hundreds of similar conversations over the years, the faces changing but the underlying dynamics remaining constant. The noblemen settle onto cushioned benches near the hall's center, and their conversation turns to topics you can't quite hear. Their voices become a pleasant murmur that mingles with the other sounds of palace life, the distant clatter of kitchen work, the soft footfalls of servants, the whisper of wind through the corridors. These sounds create a kind of music, a composition that changes subtly with the seasons and the time of day, but maintains its essential character year after year. Your eyes complete another circuit of your assigned area, registering the same details they've cataloged thousands of times before. The crack in the marble that runs along the base of the wall in the blue corridor, shaped like a river delta spreading across 3 stones. The stain on the ceiling of the golden hallway, left by some long ago water leak that created a brown shadow in the shape of a sleeping bird. The worn spot on the floor where the great hall opens into your intersection, polished smooth by countless feet crossing from one space to another. These imperfections have become landmarks in your mental map of the palace, reference points that help you navigate the endless hours of duty. You've given names to some of them: the river crack, the bird stain, the smooth crossing, private designations that help transform anonymous stone into familiar territory. It's a small act of ownership in a life where everything belongs to the empire and nothing belongs to you. The palace bells ring the 3rd hour, and your replacement approaches from the barracks quarters. He's a younger man, perhaps 30 years old, who still carries himself with the enthusiasm of someone who believes his duty matters. You remember that feeling, the sense that your watchfulness stood between the empire and chaos, that your vigilance protected not just the emperor but the entire civilization that depended on his continued existence. Time and experience have taught you that the empire is both more fragile and more resilient than you once believed, but you still perform your duty with the same attention to detail that marked your first day of service. The transfer of responsibility takes place with the formal precision that the Imperial Guard has refined over centuries. You acknowledge your replacement with a nod, he acknowledges you with a nod, and the invisible burden of watchfulness passes from your shoulders to his. You step back from your position, feeling the subtle shift in perspective that comes when you're no longer responsible for maintaining the security of this particular intersection. Your relief period begins with a walk through corridors. You know as well as your own reflection, each step carries you away from duty and toward the brief freedom that marks the middle of your day. Your muscles, accustomed to the stillness of guard position, adjust to the rhythm of walking with small protests and gradual accommodation. Your spine, held straight for 3 hours, allows itself to relax slightly as you move through spaces where perfect posture is not required. You make your way to the guard's common room, a space set aside for the members of the Imperial Guard during their off-duty hours. The room is furnished with simple wooden benches, a few tables for eating and games, and windows that look out onto one of the palace's many courtyards. Other guards who have completed their morning watch are already here, settling into the comfortable silence of men who have spent their working hours in enforced stillness. The midday meal arrives precisely on schedule, carried by servants who have perfected the art of feeding the palace guard with minimal disruption and maximum efficiency. Your bowl of barley soup steams gently, releasing the aroma of herbs and vegetables that have been simmered together since before dawn. The bread is fresh from the morning baking, still warm to the touch and dense with grain. The wine, properly diluted with water, provides just enough flavor to make the simple meal feel like a small celebration. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, not because the food is particularly delicious, but because eating is one of the few activities that requires your full attention during the day. The simple act of chewing and swallowing becomes a meditation, a way of anchoring yourself in the present moment after hours of mental vigilance. The warmth of the soup spreads through your chest, the bread provides substantial satisfaction, and the wine adds a note of comfort to the basic sustenance. Around you, other guards engage in quiet conversations about the small events that make up their lives. Marcos mentions that his daughter has learned to walk and is terrorizing his household with her newfound mobility. Theodoros shares news from a letter received from his brother, who serves in the frontier forces, and writes of border skirmishes that seem both urgent and routine. Georgios complains mildly about a persistent pain in his shoulder that reminds him of his age every morning when he straps on his armor. These conversations flow around you like water around a stone, familiar and comfortable, without requiring your participation. You've heard similar stories hundreds of times, and you'll hear them hundreds of times more. The names change, the details shift, but the underlying themes remain constant: family, health, duty, the small pleasures and minor irritations that make up human existence, even within the formal structure of imperial service. After the meal, you have 30 minutes of free time before the afternoon watch begins. Some guards use this time to nap, curling up on the wooden benches with the practiced ease of soldiers who have learned to sleep anywhere. Others play dice or knucklebones, gambling small amounts of their pay in games that provide entertainment without serious financial risk. A few read, working their way through scrolls borrowed from the palace library or letters from family members who live beyond the capital's walls. You choose to spend your break time in quiet observation. The space below is busy with afternoon activities, servants hanging laundry to dry in the sun, a group of young clerks engaged in animated discussion of some administrative matter, a cat stalking something invisible among the potted plants that line the walkways. The courtyard garden shows the first signs of spring's approach, with green shoots appearing among the carefully tended beds, and the olive trees beginning to show new growth. The gardeners who tend this space work with the same methodical dedication that you bring to your guard duty, understanding that beauty, like security, requires constant attention and cannot be achieved through occasional effort. A servant girl appears below, carrying a basket of vegetables from the kitchen gardens to the main cooking area. She pauses to speak with one of the gardeners, their conversation too distant for you to hear but clearly friendly and familiar. The girl laughs at something the gardener says, a sound that carries up to your window like a small bell ringing. These moments of spontaneous joy, brief and unguarded, remind you that even within the formal structure of palace life, human nature finds ways to express itself. The time for the afternoon watch approaches, and you begin the mental transition back to duty. Your body adjusts its posture, your mind focuses its attention, and your spirit settles into the patient alertness that guard duty requires. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about your 40 years of service, the way your entire being can shift between states of relaxation and vigilance without conscious effort, moving from one mode to another as smoothly as water flowing downhill. You return to the armory to collect your equipment, following the same routine that has marked every transition to duty throughout your career. The spear feels familiar in your hand, its weight and balance as comfortable as an old friend's handshake. The sword settles against your hip with the practiced ease of a garment worn daily for decades. Your cloak adjusts itself around your shoulders as if it knows its proper position by instinct. The afternoon post is different from the morning position, a corner of the palace that overlooks the main entrance courtyard, where visitors arrive and depart throughout the day. This position offers more visual variety than the interior corridors, but it also requires more active attention as you monitor the flow of people entering and leaving the palace complex. You take your position beside a marble column carved with intricate vine patterns, its surface cool against your shoulder when you need to adjust your stance. The column has stood here for over 200 years, supporting the roof of this portico through countless seasons and political changes. You've often wondered about the craftsman who carved these vines, whether he took pride in work that would outlast him by centuries, whether he could have imagined that his decorative details would provide daily comfort to a guard who hadn't yet been born when the chisel last touched stone. The afternoon brings a steady stream of activity to the main courtyard. Merchants arrive with goods for the palace kitchens and workshops, their carts loaded with everything from spices and wine to fine fabrics and precious metals. Each merchant must present credentials to the guards at the main gate, submit to searches of their goods, and follow prescribed routes through the palace complex. You've watched this process thousands of times, noting the way different personalities approach the security requirements, some with patience and understanding, others with barely concealed irritation at the delay. A delegation of clergy arrives from the Hagia Sophia, their black robes creating a solemn procession across the sunlit courtyard. They move with the measured pace of men accustomed to ceremony, their conversation conducted in the low tones appropriate to their status. The leader of the group, an elderly bishop with a white beard that reaches nearly to his waist, pauses to speak with the chief of the palace guard, their discussion clearly involving some matter of protocol or scheduling. The clergy disappear into the administrative wing, and the courtyard returns to its normal rhythm of activity. A group of young pages appears, sent on some errand that has them hurrying across the open space with the urgent energy of youth. They wear the simple tunics of palace servants, but their bearing suggests they come from noble families, younger sons sent to court to learn the skills that will serve them in their adult careers. Your attention is caught by a commotion near the main gate, where a courier has arrived with news that seems to have excited the guards on duty. They examine his credentials with unusual care, and one of them hurries into the palace to report the arrival to senior officials. The courier himself appears calm, suggesting that whatever news he carries is important but not catastrophic. Perhaps reports from a provincial governor or updates on trade negotiations with neighboring states. The afternoon light begins to slant at a different angle, creating new patterns of shadow and illumination across the courtyard stones. You've learned to read the time by these shadows, noting the way they creep across familiar landmarks with the precision of sundials. The shadow of the main gate post reaches the third stone of the courtyard pavement, marking the midpoint of your afternoon watch with the reliability of any timepiece. A merchant's cart approaches the palace entrance, its wheels creaking with the weight of whatever goods it carries. The merchant himself walks alongside his oxen, encouraging them with soft words and gentle touches that speak of long partnership between man and beast. The cart's contents are hidden beneath heavy canvas, but the careful way the merchant guides his animals suggests he carries something valuable or fragile, perhaps fine ceramics from the workshops of Nicaea or silk from the markets of Trebizond. The merchant presents his papers at the gate and submits to the required inspection with the patient resignation of someone who has navigated palace security many times before. The guards conduct their search with professional thoroughness, lifting the canvas covers and examining the contents with careful attention. You can't see what they discover, but their relaxed manner suggests everything is in order. No contraband, no suspicious items, nothing that threatens the security of the imperial residence. Your feet have found their afternoon position on the stones of the portico, settling into slight depressions that mark this as another well-used guard post. The marble beneath your boots has been worn smooth by generations of guards who stood this same watch, maintaining the same vigilance, following the same routines. You sometimes wonder about these men, whether they found the work as meditative as you do, whether they developed the same deep familiarity with every stone and shadow, whether they felt the same quiet satisfaction in duty performed with consistent excellence. A court musician appears in the courtyard, carrying a lute in a leather case, and moving with the slightly distracted air of someone whose mind is occupied with melody rather than immediate practical concerns. Court musicians live in a different world from palace guards, one where beauty matters more than security, where creativity is valued over consistency, where the goal is to delight rather than protect. You've often envied them their freedom to create something new each day, even as you've taken pride in the reliability of your own service. The musician disappears into the residential wing, probably summoned to provide entertainment for some afternoon gathering of nobles. Soon you'll hear the distant sound of music drifting from the palace windows, perhaps a love song from the reign of Constantine, or one of the new compositions that blend Byzantine tradition with influences from the Arab courts. The music will provide a pleasant backdrop to your vigilance, adding an element of beauty to the practical business of standing watch. The palace bells ring the 4th hour of the afternoon, their bronze voices carrying clearly across the courtyard and echoing off the surrounding walls. The sound bounds off the stone surfaces, creating a complex pattern of echoes that transforms the simple tolling into something richer and more layered. You've learned to hear the mathematics in these echoes, the way the sound waves interact with the architecture to create harmonies that exist nowhere else in the city. A group of scribes emerges from the administrative wing, their work completed for the day, and their arms free of the scrolls and tablets that usually mark their passage through the palace. They move with the slightly dazed expression of people who have spent hours focused on detailed work, blinking in the afternoon sunlight like creatures emerging from caves. Some head toward the main gate and the city beyond, while others make their way to the palace quarters where they maintain their residences. One of the scribes pauses to speak with a colleague, and their conversation drifts across the courtyard in fragments. Something about a discrepancy in tax records from a province you can't quite identify, a concern about missing documentation, a recommendation to send additional auditors to investigate the matter. The administrative machinery of the empire grinds on with the same relentless precision that marks all aspects of palace life, processing information and generating responses with mechanical efficiency. The scribe conversation ends, and the men go their separate ways, leaving the courtyard to its normal afternoon quiet. This is one of the patterns you've learned to recognize, the way palace life ebbs and flows according to schedules that have been refined over centuries. Morning brings the arrival of visitors and the beginning of official business. Afternoon sees the completion of daily tasks and the preparation for evening activities. Evening brings social gatherings and ceremonial events. Night returns the palace to the stillness that allows for rest and renewal. Your eyes continue their methodical survey of the area under your protection, noting details that might escape casual observation. A loose stone in the courtyard pavement that could trip an unwary visitor. A section of wooden railing that appears to be weathering faster than the surrounding material. A window shutter that hangs slightly askew, suggesting the need for minor repairs. These observations become part of your mental catalog of the palace's condition, information that you'll pass along to the appropriate craftsman when the opportunity arises. A cat appears from somewhere in the maze of palace corridors, padding across the courtyard. with the confident stride of an animal who knows she belongs here. This is a different cat from your morning companion, a sleek black creature with green eyes, who seems to have appointed herself unofficial inspector of the main courtyard. She pauses to investigate a patch of sunlight near the fountain, testing its warmth with one delicate paw before settling into it with obvious satisfaction. The cat begins the elaborate grooming ritual that seems to occupy much of any cat's day, her pink tongue working methodically through her black fur. You find yourself timing your visual sweeps to match her cleaning routine, creating a rhythm that connects your duty to her maintenance. It's another small anchor in the flow of time, a way of marking the passage of minutes through the activities of a creature who operates according to instincts older than the empire itself. A servant appears with a bucket and cloth, beginning the daily cleaning of the courtyard fountain. The fountain provides both practical water supply and decorative beauty, its carved dolphins and scrolling waves creating a centerpiece for the open space. The servant works with careful attention to detail, cleaning each carved element with the thoroughness that palace service demands. The water catches the afternoon light as it splashes, creating small rainbows that dance and disappear with each movement of the cleaning cloth. The servant finishes his work and disappears back into the palace interior, leaving the fountain spotless and the courtyard returned to its normal quiet. The black cat has completed her grooming and settled into a contented doze, her tail twitching occasionally as she dreams of whatever occupies the sleeping minds of palace cats. The afternoon light continues its slow journey across the courtyard stones, marking time with the precision of celestial clockwork. Your stomach begins to signal the approach of the evening meal, a familiar hunger that reminds you of the body's needs even during the mental focus of guard duty. The palace kitchens will soon begin preparation of the evening feast, filling the corridors with the aromas of roasting meat, baking bread, and simmering sauces. Your own meal will be simpler: bread, cheese, perhaps some fruit from the palace orchards, and wine properly diluted with water, but it will be satisfying in the way that simple food becomes when it marks the end of honest work. A messenger arrives at the main gate, his horse lathered with sweat, and his manner suggesting urgency. The guards examine his credentials with particular care before allowing him to enter the palace compound. The messenger disappears into the palace interior, and the courtyard settles back into its afternoon rhythm. You've seen hundreds of similar arrivals over the years, some bringing news of victories, others carrying reports of disasters, most delivering routine communications that seem urgent to their bearers, but prove to be ordinary updates on the empire's vast and complex affairs. The imperial bureaucracy requires constant communication between the capital and the provinces, generating a steady stream of messengers who arrive with the regularity of migrating birds. Your afternoon watch continues with the measured pace that has defined your entire career. Each moment passes with deliberate attention to duty, each observation noted and filed away in the mental catalog that you've built over 4 decades of service. The shadows lengthen, the light softens, and the palace prepares for the transition from day to evening that will bring new routines and different responsibilities. The palace bells ring the 5th hour, their sound marking the approach of your watch's end. Soon your replacement will arrive from the barracks, and you'll transfer the responsibility of vigilance to shoulders that are probably younger and certainly less experienced than your own. The evening guard will bring his own rhythm to this post, his own way of reading the shadows and interpreting the sounds that fill the palace courtyard after dark. A group of courtiers appears in the main entrance, their silk robes rustling as they cross the courtyard with the measured pace of people who understand that their movements are being observed. They wear the colors and symbols that mark their rank in the imperial hierarchy: purple trim for those who serve closest to the emperor, gold thread for the holders of ancient titles, silver embroidery for the administrative officials who keep the empire functioning. Their conversation is conducted in the careful tones of people who know that every word might be remembered and repeated. The courtiers disappear into the residential wing, probably heading to some evening gathering, where politics and social interaction blend in the complex dance that defines court life. You've stood guard during hundreds of such events, watching the same personalities navigate the same relationships with variations so subtle that only long observation reveals their significance. The faces change over the years as some courtiers rise in favor and others fall from grace, but the underlying patterns remain constant. Your replacement arrives precisely on schedule. His approach marked by the familiar sound of boots on stone and the quiet jingle of military equipment. He's a competent guard, perhaps 20 years your junior, who still approaches his duty with the enthusiasm of someone who believes his vigilance matters deeply. You remember that feeling and respect it, even as your own perspective has been tempered by decades of service that have taught you the difference between dramatic necessity and routine responsibility. The transfer of duty takes place with the formal precision that the Imperial Guard has maintained for centuries. You acknowledge your replacement with a nod that conveys both respect and relief. He acknowledges you with a gesture that accepts the burden of vigilance, and the guardianship of this particular section of the palace passes from your care to his. The evening meal awaits in the guard's common room, where your colleagues who have completed their day shifts gather to share food and conversation. The meal is more substantial than the midday offering: roasted chicken with herbs, bread still warm from the evening baking, cheese aged in the palace cellars, and wine that has been properly mixed with water to provide refreshment without impairment of tomorrow's duties. You eat slowly, savoring the flavors that mark the end of another day of faithful service. The chicken is tender and well seasoned. The bread has the satisfying density of grain properly prepared. The cheese carries the complex taste of careful aging, and the wine adds a note of celebration to the simple pleasure of nourishment. Marcos reports that his daughter has learned 3 new words, including one that she uses to demand more honey cakes at every meal. Theodoros shares a letter from his son, who has joined the naval forces, and writes of sea battles that sound both terrifying and glorious from the safety of dry land. Georgios mentions that the physician has recommended exercises for his aching shoulder, movements that make him feel foolish but seem to provide some relief from the constant pain. These conversations flow around you with the comfortable familiarity of rituals performed thousands of times. The details change. Different children, different letters, different ailments, but the underlying human concerns remain constant: family, health, the small victories and minor defeats that make up a life lived within the structured boundaries of imperial service. You listen without feeling compelled to contribute, finding peace in the knowledge that your colleagues face the same daily challenges and find the same small satisfactions in work well done. After the evening meal, you have several hours of free time before sleep claims you and prepares you for tomorrow's identical routine. Some guards use this time for personal pursuits, writing letters to family members, mending equipment, or studying scrolls borrowed from the palace library. Others gather around gaming boards, playing chess or backgammon with the serious concentration of men who have few other outlets for competitive instincts. A few simply sit in comfortable silence, watching the evening light fade from the common room windows and listening to the sounds of a palace settling into its nighttime rhythms. You choose to spend your evening hours walking through sections of the palace that lie outside your normal patrol routes. This is your private exploration time, when you can observe the architecture and decoration of the imperial residence without the focused attention that guard duty requires. The palace contains wonders that most of its inhabitants take for granted: mosaics that tell stories of imperial victories, frescoes that depict scenes from classical mythology, sculptures that represent the finest craftsmanship of master artisans who worked generations ago. Tonight you find yourself drawn to the Chapel of the Virgin, a small religious space tucked away in a corner of the palace complex that sees little traffic outside of formal ceremonies. The chapel's interior is illuminated by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across walls covered with religious imagery. Christ Pantocrator gazes down from the dome with an expression that seems both stern and compassionate, while the Virgin Mary extends her hands in a gesture of eternal blessing toward the empty pews below. The chapel air carries the lingering scent of incense from this morning's service, mixed with the honey-sweet smell of beeswax candles and the faint mustiness of ancient stone. You settle onto one of the wooden benches and allow your mind to wander through the accumulated experiences of 4 decades spent in service to the imperial household. The silence here is different from the alert quiet of guard duty. It's a peaceful stillness that invites reflection rather than vigilance. You think about the emperors you've served during your career, each bringing his own personality to the role of imperial leadership. Some were scholarly men who spent their days surrounded by books and advisors. Others were warriors who spoke constantly of military campaigns and strategic necessities. A few were genuinely pious individuals who attended religious services with obvious devotion, while others seemed to view ceremonial obligations as tedious necessities that interfered with more interesting pursuits. All of them, regardless of their personal inclinations, lived within the same marble walls that have contained your own life for so many years. They walked the same corridors, breathed the same incense-scented air, listened to the same bronze bells marking the passage of time. In some ways, your experience of palace life has been more consistent than theirs. They came and went according to the violent rhythms of imperial politics, while you remained, providing the continuity that any great institution requires. The oil lamps flicker slightly as a draft moves through the chapel, creating the illusion that the painted figures on the walls are stirring to life. Saints and angels seem to shift position in the moving shadows, their expressions changing as the light plays across their stylized features. This is one of the small magics that make palace life bearable. The way ancient art interacts with living flame to create moments of wonder in the midst of routine. You rise from the bench and continue your evening exploration, leaving the chapel to its peaceful darkness and making your way toward the palace gardens. The gardens are different at night, transformed from places of practical beauty into mysterious landscapes where familiar paths become adventures and well-known plantings take on exotic appearances. The olive trees cast intricate shadows across the gravel walkways, while the herb gardens release their evening fragrances into the cooling air. A fountain in the center of the main garden provides both visual focal point and auditory backdrop for your nighttime walk. The water catches the moonlight, as it falls from the carved basin to the pool below, creating patterns of light and shadow that shift with each ripple on the water's surface. The sound of falling water masks the small noises of your passage, allowing you to move through the garden with something approaching stealth, a skill that guard training has taught you, but that you rarely have occasion to use. The garden paths lead you past herb beds where rosemary and thyme release their scents at the brush of your cloak, past rose bushes that will bloom spectacularly in another month, past fruit trees that are just beginning to show the swelling buds that promise spring's arrival. Palace gardeners tend these spaces with the same dedication that you bring to your guard duties, understanding that beauty, like security, requires constant attention and cannot be achieved through occasional effort. You pause beside a bench positioned to overlook the entire garden, settling onto its marble surface to rest your feet and enjoy the panoramic view of carefully cultivated nature. From this position, you can see the geometric patterns that organize the garden space, the straight lines of the herb beds, the circular arrangement of the rose plantings, the radiating paths that lead from the central fountain to various corners of the enclosed area. The design speaks of human desire to impose order on natural chaos, a theme that resonates with your own life spent maintaining structured vigilance within the unpredictable flow of palace politics. The night air carries sounds from the city beyond the palace walls, the distant call of a merchant closing his shop, the bark of dogs in neighborhoods where ordinary citizens live ordinary lives, the faint music from a tavern where people gather to drink wine and forget their daily troubles. These sounds remind you that your careful existence within the palace walls is just one small part of a larger world that continues its business regardless of imperial ceremony or guard duty protocols. You think about the life you might have lived if you had chosen a different path. Perhaps as a farmer working land that belonged to your family for generations, or as a craftsman creating objects that would outlast your own lifetime, or as a merchant traveling between cities and seeing new landscapes with each season. These alternate lives seem both appealing and impossible from your current perspective. Dreams that might have been reality if you had made different choices 4 decades ago. But regret seems pointless when viewed from the comfortable distance of middle age and long service. Your life has been spent in meaningful work that contributed to the stability of the empire, even if that contribution was measured in quiet vigilance rather than dramatic action. You've been fed, housed, and paid fairly for your efforts, and you found small satisfactions in the daily performance of duty executed with consistent excellence. Many men can claim no more, and some can claim far less. The garden begins to feel cool as the night deepens, and you realize that your bedtime approaches with the same inevitability that marks all aspects of palace routine. You rise from the marble bench and make your way back through the garden paths, past the fountain with its musical water, past the herb beds with their evening fragrances, past the olive trees with their intricate shadows. The walk back to your quarters takes you through corridors that are dimly lit by oil lamps, spaced at regular intervals, creating pools of golden light connected by stretches of comfortable darkness. Your quarters consist of a small room furnished with the necessities of a guard's life: a narrow bed with a straw mattress and woolen blankets, a wooden chest for your personal possessions, a small table and chair for writing letters or reading during your free time, and a window that looks out onto one of the palace's many courtyards. The room is simple but adequate, providing the privacy and comfort that allow you to rest properly between periods of duty. You remove your uniform with the careful attention that 40 years of service have taught you to give to equipment that must last. The cloak is folded and placed on its wooden peg. The sword is cleaned and returned to its scabbard. The boots are checked for wear and positioned beside the bed where they'll be ready for tomorrow's duties. Your civilian clothes, a simple tunic and trousers suitable for sleeping, are comfortable after the structured formality of your guard uniform. The window of your quarters frames a view of the courtyard where you stood morning watch, now transformed by darkness into a landscape of shadows and moonlight. The marble columns that provide architectural structure during the day become mysterious shapes that seem to move slightly as clouds pass across the moon. The fountain that provides practical water supply and decorative beauty during daylight hours becomes a source of gentle sound that will help lull you to sleep. You settle onto your narrow bed, pulling the woolen blankets up to your chin and arranging your body in the position that experience has taught you promotes the deepest rest. Your muscles, accustomed to the tensions of guard duty, begin to relax as they recognize the familiar transition from wakefulness to sleep. Your mind, trained to maintain alert vigilance during working hours, allows itself to drift toward the peaceful emptiness that will restore your energy for tomorrow's identical routine. The sounds of the palace at night create a gentle symphony that accompanies your journey towards sleep. The distant murmur of voices from the guards who maintain the midnight watch, the soft footfalls of servants completing their final tasks of the day, the whisper of wind through corridors that never completely empty of human activity. These sounds speak of an institution that never truly sleeps, that maintains its essential functions even during the hours when most of its inhabitants rest. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm of sleep, and your last conscious thoughts focus on tomorrow's duties. The morning position at the intersection of the blue corridor and the golden hallway, the familiar routine of equipment inspection and formal watchfulness, the predictable progression of hours marked by bronze bells, and the movement of shadows across marble floors. The prospect of another identical day brings comfort rather than tedium, representing the continuation of a life that has found meaning in the consistent performance of necessary work. Sleep claims you gradually, drawing you into dreams that often feature the same marble corridors and bronze bells that fill your waking hours. Sometimes you dream of standing guard during events that never actually occurred, ceremonies involving emperors from different centuries, crises that required vigilance against threats that never materialized, conversations with colleagues who died years ago but continue to share their wisdom in the landscape of sleep. Morning arrives with the familiar sound of the palace bells calling the dawn watch to their duties, and you wake with the automatic alertness that 4 decades of service have built into your reflexes. Your body knows the routine so well that you're often fully dressed and ready for duty before your mind has completely processed the transition from sleep to wakefulness. The day begins exactly as the previous day ended, with the bronze bells, the marble corridors, and the patient vigilance that defines your life. You make your way to the armory, select your equipment with the same careful attention you've given to this task for 40 years, and walk the 237 steps to your morning post. The intersection of the blue corridor and the golden hallway waits exactly as you left it yesterday evening, unchanged by the passage of night, and ready for another day of faithful guardianship. The morning light filters through the narrow windows, creating the same patterns of illumination that you've observed thousands of times before. The portraits of dead emperors watch from their frames with the same eternal patience they've maintained throughout your career. The cat appears from somewhere in the maze of palace corridors, settling into her customary patch of sunlight to begin another day of royal feline surveillance. Your feet find their familiar position on the marble floor. Your hands adjust their grip on the ceremonial spear, and your eyes begin their methodical survey of the corridors under your protection. The first hour of your 41st year of service begins exactly like the first hour of your first year, with the same dedication to duty and the same quiet satisfaction in work that contributes to something larger than yourself. The palace bells ring the first hour, their bronze voices echoing through corridors that have heard the same sound for centuries. You settle into the patient alertness that will carry you through another day of vigilant service, another small contribution to the continuity that keeps empires functioning through the accumulation of countless individual acts of faithfulness. The morning progresses with the familiar rhythm of a palace awakening to its daily routines. Servants begin their rounds, carrying messages and supplies to their various destinations. Scribes appear, with their arms full of scrolls and tablets, heading to the administrative wings where they'll spend their day copying documents and updating records. Court officials emerge from their quarters, dressed in the silk robes that mark their rank, and heading to meetings that will determine policy for provinces they've never seen. You watch this daily procession with the same attention you've given it for 40 years, noting the subtle changes that mark the passage of seasons and the evolution of palace life. New faces appear among the servants, replacing those who have retired or died or found different employment. The silk robes worn by court officials show slight variations in color and decoration, reflecting changes in fashion or imperial preference. The documents carried by scribes deal with different provinces and different concerns, but the underlying administrative processes remain constant. Your morning passes in the comfortable rhythm of practiced vigilance, each moment flowing into the next with the predictability that has defined your entire adult life. The sun moves across the sky at its eternal pace. The shadows shift across the marble floors, according to celestial mathematics that haven't changed since the palace was built, and the bronze bells mark the passage of hours with the same precision they've maintained for generations. As the morning ends, and your replacement approaches to take over the watch, you realize that you've found something that many people search for throughout their lives. A sense of purpose that doesn't depend on drama or recognition, satisfaction that comes from the consistent performance of necessary work, peace that grows from the knowledge that your life has contributed to something larger and more enduring than individual ambition. You stand here in these marble corridors, surrounded by the accumulated beauty and power of the Byzantine Empire, knowing that your 40 years of service have been part of the vast human effort that creates and maintains civilization. Your vigilance has been one thread in the tapestry of order that allows emperors to rule, artists to create, scholars to study, and ordinary citizens to live their lives with some measure of security and predictability. The afternoon light streams through the windows of your new post, illuminating the courtyard where merchants and messengers continue their daily business under the watchful eyes of guards who understand that their presence makes all other activities possible. You take your position beside the marble column, adjust your grip on the ceremonial spear, and settle into the patient alertness that will carry you through another afternoon of faithful service. Your story continues with the same quiet dedication that has defined it from the beginning. Not the dramatic tale of heroes and villains that fills the chronicles of imperial history, but the steady narrative of a man who found meaning in the consistent performance of necessary work. Your life unfolds in the rhythm of bronze bells and marble corridors, in the patient observation of shadows and sunlight, in the quiet satisfaction of duty performed with excellence day after day, year after year, decade after decade. The palace around you breathes with the life of an institution that has survived for centuries through the accumulated efforts of countless individuals who understood that greatness comes not from single acts of heroism, but from the patient dedication of ordinary people who choose to serve something larger than themselves. Your 40 years of service represent just one small part of this vast human achievement, but it is a part that has been performed with honor, dignity, and the quiet excellence that makes civilization possible. Standing here in the afternoon light, watching the familiar patterns of palace life unfold around you, you understand that your life has been well spent. The marble corridors that have contained your days have also given them meaning. The bronze bells that have marked your hours have also blessed them with rhythm and purpose, and the patient vigilance that has defined your service has also made you part of something eternal and significant. The sun continues its ancient journey across the sky. The shadows continue their predictable dance across the marble floors, and you continue your watch with the same dedication that brought you to this moment, ready to serve, prepared to protect, committed to the patient excellence that has defined your life and will define whatever days remain to you in the service of the empire that has been both your home and your purpose for 40 years of faithful guardianship. Your breath steams slightly in the cooling air as evening approaches, and you realize that this day, like so many others, has passed in the comfortable rhythm of duty performed with quiet excellence. Tomorrow will bring another identical routine, another opportunity to contribute your small part to the vast enterprise of imperial governance, another day of standing watch in the marble corridors that have become as familiar as your own reflection. The bronze bells ring the hour, their sound echoing through the palace corridors with the same authority they've carried for centuries, calling you to another evening of rest and preparing you for another morning of service. The endless cycle continues, predictable and comforting, marking time with the patient precision that has kept empires functioning through the accumulated dedication of countless individuals who understood that civilization depends not on dramatic gestures, but on the quiet excellence of ordinary work performed with extraordinary faithfulness. As you stand here in the fading light of another day spent in service to the empire, you reflect on how these marble corridors have witnessed the rise and fall of emperors, the celebration of victories, the mourning of defeats, and through it all, the constant presence of guards like yourself, who maintained their watch regardless of the dramatic events that captured the attention of historians and chroniclers. If you enjoyed this ride, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, maybe about your own experiences with repetitive work, or just to let me know what time it is where you're listening and how this strange journey through Byzantine palace life has treated you tonight. Until next time, sleep well, and remember that sometimes the most profound stories are found not in the dramatic moments that make headlines, but in the quiet dedication of ordinary people who choose to serve something larger than themselves, day after day, year after year, in the patient rhythm of bronze bells and marble corridors that have echoed with the footsteps of faithful guardians for over 1,000 years.